Surprising move by the Kremlin troubled recruitment in the Russian army. Hello to Pioneer viewers. As you know, our agenda is the Russia-Ukraine war. The war continues with great seriousness. The sides are fighting an incredible struggle on the front line. The clashes, which intensify from time to time, continues with a great effort from the both sides. It seems very important to be able to fight without losing the discipline of the war. The more disciplined the soldiers of warring army do their job, the higher the success rate. It is not easy to maintain the discipline necessary for soldiers to carry out their duties with seriousness. Years of experience and the organization of the army systems are important factors in this regard. What soldiers need to complete their mission successfully is a spirit. Only soldiers who believe and are dedicated to their country can possess this spirit. Following the Russia's invasion attempts against Ukraine, we have reported many news from the front line. Since the first days of the war, the problems of the soldiers have been on the agenda. Many times. Military service is not an easy profession or duty. To be in combat units, one has to complete very challenging tasks. The Russian army has been struggling with soldiers' problems since the early days. In the early days, many Russian soldiers fled the war. Some of them fled abroad, while others surrendered to the Ukrainian army. Moscow's unlawful invasion attempt also drew the reaction of its own soldiers. On the other hand, there were soldiers in the Ukrainian army who wanted to save their country from the occupation. For this reason, there was a big difference in the motivation between the two armies. Recently, reports have revealed the situation of the soldiers in the Russian army. And now, if you're ready, let's examine the problems of the soldiers in the Russian army together. As the Pioneer, we continue to report on Russia-Ukraine war. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so as not to miss our daily map reports and reports on the agenda. I also read all your comments on our videos. Please continue to share your ideas about our content in the comments with us. Let's start if you are ready. The Pioneer reports. From the first days of the war, the Russian army showed a problematic behavior. And there were many reasons for this. In the early days, the Russian army made a rapid breakthrough with the Russian invasion attempt. As the Russian army invaded Ukraine, its losses increased. Faced with the Ukrainian defenses, Russian troops began to disappear. The invasion attempt, which Moscow characterized as a special military operation, was becoming increasingly difficult for the Russian army. The Russian soldiers, on the other hand, became very worried when they realized that the Russian army was not as strong as they thought. Most of the Russian soldiers in the Russian army were recruits. These soldiers, who were far away from the discipline of war, preferred to run away from the war when they encountered difficulties. As the units of the Russian army began to disintegrate, it became very difficult for Moscow to replace them with new troops. With the Ukrainian armies launching effective counterattacks, Russian troops were trapped in certain areas. Troops entrapment is a major problem in wartime conditions, and a strong logistics network is necessary to transfer the trapped troops to safety or to reinforce them. The Ukrainian army's effective counterattacks, however, greatly hammered the Russian logistics. As a result, the Russian army was unable to reinforce its troops. Russian troops retreated as they found it difficult to resist the Ukrainian counterattacks. The Ukrainian army, on the other hand, began to clear its territory of occupation. The troop shortage in the Russian army was a very important issue for the Moscow. As the Moscow administration took steps to solve the problem grew. As a result of the problems with the Wagner group, the troops' problem grew even more with the departure of the Wagner troops from the war. The fact revealed in the reports published in the recent days brought a big scandal to the agenda. The internal structure of the Russian army has a very complex feature. The Russian officials did not make any statements about the emerging news. According to the emerging news, the soldiers' deficits in the Russian army are trying to be closed with the prisoners. According to the allegations, prisoners in prisons in Russia are being driven to the battlefield by the Moscow administration. As a result of the agreements made by the prisoners, they are recruited for military services. Prisoners are being offered amnesty as a result of the agreements to fight in Ukraine for 6 months. Many prisoners accept the offer in order to gain their freedom. The figures in the published report show striking results regarding the number of prisoners pardoned in Russia. The number of prisoners pardoned by the Russian presidents exceeds the number of thousands. Half of these prisoners are walking free on the streets of Russia. Convicted soldiers taken by the Russian army are put on the front lines of the front line. Prisoners who are used negatively by the Russian army are forced to undertake the most difficult tasks on the battlefield. According to the information obtained from local sources, prisoners are called meat by the Russian army. Prisoners who have no value for the Kremlin are made to fight for their lives. Military experts say Russia's practice is reminiscent of Soviet penal battalions. Experts say it is impossible to achieve any success with the inexperienced soldiers and undisciplined prisoners. Prisoners are also responsible for most of the public order problems in the front lines. There are mass desertion from the Russian army. Problems and insecurities in military units worry Russian soldiers. Soldiers are also disturbed by the fact that prisoners who are not suitable for military services are sent to the troops. The fact that many criminals are serving in the Russian army also draws the reaction of former soldiers. Moscow's policy also increases the crime rate in Russia. When the prisoners who have completed their combat duty return to the cities, they commit crimes again. Many prisoners who return to Russian cities after fighting in Ukraine choose to commit crimes again. Even Nikolai Ogolobyak, who confessed to being a member of the Satanist sect and was sentenced to 20 years in prison for killing 4 young men during a ritual, is among those pardoned by Putin. As just one example shows, the number of spies and criminals in the Russian army is causing huge problems. Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, told reporters last month that pardoned convicts do not escape punishment but are instead on the battlefield in assault brigades under bullets. The Russian leader himself admitted that convicts were thus sent to the front lines. Another reason for Putin's policy is the upcoming elections. Featuring a backlash from the Russian people in the elections, Putin wants to recruit soldiers from the minority groups in the neighborhoods instead of the Russians living in the city. Putin, who is afraid of declaring a massive military mobilization, prefers to meet the needs for soldiers from prisoners. The law and order problems and lack of discipline in the Russian army are closely monitored by the Ukrainian army. What do you think about the prisoner soldiers in the Russian army? Do you think it's possible to achieve success with the undisciplined soldiers? How do you evaluate Putin's policy? What do you think about the positions of the Ukrainian army in the war? What do you think about the upcoming Russian elections? We care about your opinion. Please share it with us.